Yeah, thanks for the nice introduction, and welcome to my talk, which is the very last one of today. So I try to hurry up that we can get together to have some beers. Yeah, my talk is titled "Your Wi-Fi is the Eavesdropper's Radar: How to Counter Privacy Threats of Wireless Sensing." My name is Paul Staat, and I'm a PhD student since 2019, supervised by Christoph Paar at the Max Planck Institute for Security and Privacy, which is actually located roughly 150 meters from here on campus of the Ruhr University. And my research interest is somewhere at the intersection of radio frequency systems, wireless security, and hardware security. Part of the talk that I give today is the result of research that I did recently with my collaborators. And these namely are Simon Mulzer, Stefan Roth, Vilasha Munsami, who's actually here in the audience currently, then Markus Heinrichs, Rainer Kronberger, Aydin Seskin, and Christoph Paar. Today's talk is not about stock photos, but it's about Wi-Fi devices. So I'm pretty sure that most of us have at least a couple of those devices at home. And these may be smartphones, computers, Internet of Things devices, or smart home devices of arbitrary kind. But the question today is, how do these devices affect our privacy? And the privacy threats that come with these devices that use Wi-Fi communications could be attributed to three particular causes. And the first one is application security. Say, for example, when a vacuum cleaner or an IP camera uploads images unencrypted to the internet, to the cloud, then obviously this is a privacy threat. The second level is network level inference attacks. So for example, say you have a bunch of smart home devices at home, and there are packet level features like the amount of traffic that is on the air, or maybe the length of physical Wi-Fi transmissions which allow to infer the packet, the payload length. Then this could also leak information on user activities at home, for instance. And the third level, and this is what I will cover in my talk today, is physical layer wireless sensing. And here an adversary analyzes Wi-Fi radio signals, like the actual waves that are being transmitted and can be received by an adversarial party, and analyzes these signals similarly to a radar to make claims about what is going on in victim environments. Okay, in this talk, we will first discuss the physical layer of Wi-Fi. We will then go on to introduce wireless sensing and give an exemplary application of wireless sensing, an adversarial application, and we will also briefly discuss its privacy implications. And finally, we present IR-Shield, which is a countermeasure that we recently introduced against adversarial wireless sensing. Okay, so according to the OSI layer, the IEEE 802.11 family of Wi-Fi protocols specifies functionalities on the OSI layers 1 and 2. And on layer 2, this is the medium access layer, the standards specify the physical device addressing, packet formats, as well as specific message exchanges. And here we can see the four-way handshake, which is used to establish encrypted communication. Another thing that these standards specify is the physical layer. And the physical layer defines, for example, everything how we allocate the physical channel, how we do the transmission in between the antennas of a couple of devices. And for instance, this might be the orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, or short OFDM modulation, which is now ubiquitous for standards like Wi-Fi, but also for 4G and 5G. So the remainder of the talk will largely focus on the physical layer. If we take a look into the, let it be a multiple thousand-page long Wi-Fi standard, we will somewhere find the definition of a PPDU. This is short for Physical Layer Protocol Data Unit. So this is basically the smallest quantity that you can find in Wi-Fi, or the most basic one, where we have the packet format on the physical layer. And as we can see here, every PPDU begins with a preamble. And this preamble is necessary at first to detect the signal, and also to do something like frequency estimation, where we want to know where the frequency of the transmission is, but also it's crucial to perform channel estimation. And I will get to this in a minute, but I can also already say that channel estimation is a vital step for the reception of the data. The important takeaway from this slide is that every Wi-Fi transmission begins with a known sequence, which is the preamble, and on the physical layer there is no such thing than encryption. So this is unencrypted and available to basically everyone. Okay, as promised, Wi-Fi channel estimation. Why is this necessary? Yeah, we have, when a Wi-Fi device transmits a signal, say a radio signal, modulated containing data towards a receiver. During propagation, there are all kind of physical effects that go on that distort the original signal that was transmitted from the transmitter to the receiver. So these might be attenuation, where the amplitude of the signal decreases over distance, but also the signal that is being transmitted might be reflected off the walls of a room and bounces several times, and then this introduces multipath propagation. So what this does to a signal is that it cannot be properly received anymore. So the receiver must remove these effects of the radio wave propagation from the signals to properly receive the data that is contained in the packet. So therefore, the receiver takes the preamble at the very beginning of a packet and then estimates the channel and compensates all of what is subsequent to this packet. So the subsequent symbols are then being equalized for those who are familiar with what is going on. And then this is performed by every Wi-Fi receiver that possibly receives a Wi-Fi packet. So this is crucial within the receiver. Okay, the result of this channel estimation is so-called channel state information, and this might be understood as something like a received signal strength indication on steroids. So this is a very accurate measure. And it gives it samples the complex valued frequency domain transfer function of the wireless channel. That's basically describing how waves propagate in between a set of antennas between the transmitter and the receiver. Okay, and this would be one example how such an estimate looks like. Coming to wireless sensing. Wireless sensing is the process of extracting information about surrounding environments from such wireless channels. And this works because, as I mentioned before, the wireless channel is environment dependent. As radio waves propagate, they interact with the environment. They maybe penetrate walls, they bounce off bodies of individuals, and this is all part of the interaction which is going on during Wi-Fi propagation. And to perform wireless sensing, we have this channel estimation procedure. A receiver now can repurpose the CSI data and this channel estimates to perform wireless sensing tasks. This would allow things like detection, recognition, or estimation of physical states that are going on in the environment. There's actually a whole line of research which only investigates how to process CSI data in clever ways to obtain certain or to accomplish certain sensing tasks. And to just name a few, here are some examples. It's possible to detect motion or arbitrary events that occur in physical environments. It's possible to detect gestures, keystrokes, or even objects. And also interesting is it's possible to track vital signs, like breath tracking and something. So there's, this is a pretty powerful tool. One remark, wireless sensing is not only something that is going on in academia, but there's actually currently a drive towards standardization of wireless sensing. And I promise you, wireless sensing is coming to a wireless network somewhere near you in the near future, because standardization is currently ongoing for Wi-Fi, for Bluetooth, and also for 6G. So this is something that is being deployed in the future. So now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure that some of you already know where this could be going. The question is, what is the adversarial potential of wireless sensing? You know, radio wave propagation, this is a broadcast medium. It's undirected, mostly. It can be made directed, but usually we will assume that we transmit a signal, and the signal then propagates in all directions. So it's not like I can direct a signal only to one certain receiver. But everyone in this room could detect the Wi-Fi traffic that is directed to or intended for my smartphone. Although not on the application layer, it's certainly encrypted, but the physical layer signals every one of you could receive using a radio. And that also implies that when a malicious party or a rogue receiver receives your physical layer signals, this adversary then can also perform channel estimation from the known preamble and also can perform wireless sensing tasks. And this is the adversary that we face when we talk of adversarial wireless sensing. Okay, to the privacy implications, as we can see in the illustration. The passive eavesdropper could maybe covertly mount a Wi-Fi receiver on the outside of a premise and then receive all the transmissions that emanate from within the inside of this environment. And so the ability to receive such Wi-Fi signals then also implies the ability to perform wireless sensing. So when we then use non-cooperative wireless sensing techniques, the model is that we have a completely passive eavesdropper who sits in front of our door, or maybe a bit hidden somewhere, and listens to our Wi-Fi traffic, and can then obtain sensitive information about what is happening within our environment or within the environment that is being monitored. And the adversary would potentially have the very same sensing capabilities that legitimate parties would have, and these might look something like this. Okay, we actually implemented such an attack, and I will first go a bit into the experimental setup that we used. And we deployed an off-the-shelf commodity Wi-Fi router, which we use as a transmitter. That might be as an ordinary router, which we just placed within an environment. And this router transmits packets. And these packets are being received by a second router, which is also a commodity device, of the same kind. This device simulates our eavesdropper, our passive eavesdropper, and we've loaded a custom firmware onto this router, and this firmware allows us to extract the CSI data. So this is basically everything that an eavesdropper needs to have a device that is capable of outputting these channel estimates, which then gives the eavesdropper a nice sensing modality to perform wireless sensing tasks. With this setup at hand, we implemented a state-of-the-art attack, which was presented by Zhu et al. At NDSS 2020. And in this attack, the authors presented a human motion detection based on eavesdropping Wi-Fi signals. So what we did is we did like the authors. We had an environment, and we place a transmitter, and then we place our receiver, which is the eavesdropper, and then the packets that are being sent by the transmitter can then be listened to from the outside of the premise by the eavesdropper. So the eavesdropper, when this environment is steady, when there's nothing going on in the environment, and when the eavesdropper then looks at the CSI data it obtains, the CSI data will be largely static. So there's not a lot going on. And this bit of noise, that's the background noise which is present on the wireless channel. So this is how a time sequence looks like of CSI when we take a look at the CSI data when the environment is static. Now, when we make this small person, which you can maybe see on the figure, make it now start move. So then we will observe quite strong signal variation. And it can be seen here in blue. And this variation, this signal variation, is particularly strong when this person, with this individual, is walking close by the line of sight, which is the direct line which we can draw from the transmitter to the receiver. And but still, it's also sufficiently high or large to still detect motion or to still distinguish the cases, even when the individual is walking off the line of sight. So to quantify the channel variation, which is the statistical feature to detect human motion within the environment, the authors proposed to use a sliding standard deviation. And then we just basically look at the 1 second window, slide this window over the entire observation length, and then get a nice and clean measure to actually detect motion. So what the adversary does is it uses first a reference measurement where the assumption is that there is that the environment is steady. And this is based on the assumption that if we observe a premise maybe for 2 hours or something, then there will certainly not be all the time motion, but most of the time the environment will be rather static. And then it would be possible to derive such a threshold or to observe such a reference measurement that we can use as a ground truth. And then from this reference measurement, the adversary derives a motion detection threshold. And this would then give us the motion detection region. So everything that is above this red line, the threshold, would then be classified as motion. And as we can see here, the two classes are actually pretty good distinguishable. So effectively, in this experiment, we would detect motion correctly in all of the cases, like at all positions in the room where the individual was walking on the slide I showed previously. So what could be done to stop such attacks? That's actually a bit a difficult thing to do because our attack works on the physical layer. So we cannot simply apply encryption and hide everything that is within the radio waves. The radio waves are on the physical layer, and everyone who can receive them will also gather the information that are contained or transported by the radio waves. And this is actually a conflicting goal. On the one hand, we want to have long range and broad coverage of Wi-Fi at home, and we want the signals to penetrate walls, and we want to have good quality of service. But on the other hand, we want to prevent sensitive information from being leaked, and these goals somewhat contradict each other, because, as I said, the ability to receive Wi-Fi signals on the physical layer implies the ability to apply wireless sensing. So previous countermeasures in this field were using full duplex radios. These are some quite exotic and difficult radio devices, and these are not available commercially. This is only available for research purposes. Other countermeasures were using mechanic parts, where maybe you have some rotating devices that you can place at home, but that's inconvenient, I'd say. Other proposals were to make changes to transmitter or receiver devices, and I mean, there are billions of Wi-Fi devices out there in the field already, and these cannot be updated on the physical layer. The physical layer is in hardware usually. And the third class of countermeasures was doing a trade-off. Like, this is the trade-off that I touched upon before. Reducing the wireless quality of service, maybe reducing data rates, or maybe reducing the communication distance, in order to reduce or diminish wireless sensing capabilities. So the next couple of slides are the results from our paper, which has the title IR Shield, a countermeasure against adversarial wireless physical layer sensing, which we presented at last year's IEEE S&P conference in San Francisco. And this was joint work with the colleagues from the Ruhr University and also from TH Köln, with those collaborators I named already at the beginning of the talk. In this work, we propose to use a novel technology as a countermeasure against adversarial wireless sensing. And this technology, to be exact, is the intelligent reflecting surface, or short, the IRS. So this is a new technology which is currently in discussion for future 6G wireless networks. And these devices, they enable smart radio propagation environments. So the paradigm before was that we have two communication devices at the end of the wireless channel. We have a transmitter and we have a receiver. Now the intelligent reflecting surface gives wireless communication engineers now a degree of freedom that allows them to optimize the radio wave propagation in between these two parties. So we have maybe an intelligent reflecting surface mounted on the wall over there, and then it's digitally configurable to steer waves in an intelligent wave, maybe like a mirror, something like this, towards my smartphone that I can enjoy higher data rates. So that's the basic concept behind the IRS. But I will get to this in more detail on the next slides. So by deploying IR Shield, what we found is that we can use an IRS to deploy it in the proximity of wireless devices and thereby impede or diminish adversarial wireless sensing. And I will refer back to the attack that I just outlined with the human motion detection, and we were able to reduce detection rates to below 5%, or in most cases to 0% with our attack. And as we designed the attack, we resolved the following three key challenges. So the first one is that IR Shield is capable of standalone operation. So it's independent of devices. So it's independent of waveforms, of standards. It's absolutely device agnostic because this device operates on the physical layer without interacting on the protocol level with the devices. The second is that an IRS has a huge configuration space. So our prototype, each of these elements, there are 256 on it, it can be configured binary. So this yields a configuration space of 2 to the 256. And yeah, this makes it infeasible to extract some tailored configurations from it, and we found a way to do it, to still do it. And finally, and this was one of the more important challenges, maybe the most important one, we leave the wireless quality of service unaffected. So that is, it does not have this trade-off between the ability to do wireless communication and the ability to prevent wireless sensing. Okay, so let me give you a brief overview on how an IRS works. So this IRS was developed by Markus Heinrichs and Rainer Kronberger from the TH Köln, and these are our radio frequency guys in our team, and they actually did a great job in manufacturing these devices. And what you do when you design an IRS is that you start with a unit cell reflector. So this is maybe a blueprint circuit, a small radio frequency circuit, where you have a PCB patch antenna, and this is designed to reflect radio waves. And then there is a small RF circuit attached to the reflector, and this circuit can be controlled by a microcontroller, and there's a small diode, and this diode is then used as a switch to basically switch the reflection coefficient of the element. To obtain an IRS from a unit cell, we simply replicate this unit cell 256 times in a rectangular and periodic grid, and this gives us a 256 element IRS, and this is roughly of the size 30 times 40 centimeters, and this was manufactured as a low-cost printed circuit board. One of these devices is about, like a prototype, a research prototype, is about $100, so not too much. And for 6G deployment, it's actually in discussion, or that's what people investigate currently, to build this stuff into the surfaces of furnitures or walls of buildings. This device operates, by the way, in the 5.35 gigahertz range, and this is roughly somewhere where also Wi-Fi operates, and so we used it with the Wi-Fi devices. So to understand how the IRS works, say we have two parties. We have one party transmitting a radio signal towards the other. Then there may be a couple of propagation paths. And then when we add the IRS, we will add additional propagation path to the radio channel in between these devices. So the reflections then bounce off the IRS. And at the receiver observes the superposition of all of these reflections. So these are complex valued things, and you could imagine it as vectors, as adding vectors together, and that's actually how it's exactly modeled in the communications by the communications guys when looking at I and Q diagrams. But this is basically how it would look like when we do not properly adjust the surface. We get a random outcome, random result. And we have this non-IRS signal propagation, and then we have these IRS controllable signal propagation. And this signal propagation is actually digitally programmable. So now when we feed an appropriate configuration into the IRS by programming it simply binary, we then can optimize the configuration to increase the received signal power maybe at the device, and then this helps to access higher data rates. the basic idea behind using an IRS for IR shield is that we add random signals which obfuscate signal variation caused by environmental variation. So in this model here, we have the radio wave propagation getting directly towards the intended receiver. Now this is an unintended receiver because it's the adversary listening to our Wi-Fi signals, which we certainly do not want, but it still happens. Then there is the motion or maybe something else in the environment which carries the information from the inside to the outside towards the adversary. And then there's our IRS that also introduces a reflection path and obfuscates, hopefully, the signals that come from the motion. So as I've outlined before, the adversary motion detection is based on the IRS, is based on detecting the signal variation in the channel. And now when we add the IRS, we again introduce signal variation, and this then diminishes the adversary's success in correctly detecting the motion. So effectively, we obfuscate the mapping from signal variation or radio wave propagation and the varying propagation to the motion on the other side. So our goal when designing IR Shield was that we want to introduce random signal variation with the IRS. So instead of observing something that is constant over time, we want to have something that looks like the plots that I showed before where the channel is time varying. And what we did is we came up with a solution that we take a small subset of 5% of the surface elements, we randomly select them, and flip their state. And this we repeat 20 times a second. And in this manner, we introduce gradual randomized changes to the surface, and introducing gradual randomized changes to the surface, likewise will introduce gradual randomized changes to the adversary observation. Okay, so this is the raw observation, the raw CSI data that the adversary sees. Now, as I mentioned before, the adversary applies the sliding standard deviation. But the problem now is the sliding standard deviation is low and remains quite constant. But what we want is that we vary the sliding standard deviation. We want the sliding standard deviation to be high, to look like something like motion would cause. And our workaround was to introduce an additional inversion step to the randomization. So we take the surface, we randomize 5% of the surface, then we flip the entire configuration, like all of the surface, and then go on with the 5% flipping. And in this way, we get both. We get a large change because we change the whole surface, and we get gradual randomized changes. Now, when we investigate, or when we look at the sliding standard deviation, this will look similar, at least, to the effect of motion in the environment, because now we introduce also a varying mean and varying standard deviation. Here we again can see the results of our motion experiment, of the motion detection experiment that we did before. So the adversary observes the environment without motion and then comes up with a motion detection threshold. And the results is the detection region, which here is indicated in red. And every time the blue line, which was recorded with the individual walking across the room, every time this blue line crosses into the red region, the adversary will detect motion within the environment. Now, when we enable IR shields, we can see two things that happen. So the first thing is that the IR shield interferes with the adversary's threshold finding. So that is the threshold The threshold derivation takes account the variance of the reference observation, and therefore the adversary will come up with an overly high detection threshold, and this will make the adversary miss possible motion events in the first place. The second thing is that the cases without and with motion, they are now largely indistinguishable. So with IR shield in place, our conclusion is that the adversarial detection is completely suspended. Now, when we did a different experiment where we locate or put the transmitter at a different location within the environment, now the effect of the human motion, it has a way stronger effect than before. This might be because I would cross in between the line of sight, which is the direct line between the transmitter and the receiver device. Now, when I cross through this line of sight, I will block the signal, and this will reduce the majority of the radio signals, and then introduce blockage, and this causes significant fluctuation in the signals. So now we face a way stronger effect of human motion. Now, when we again enabled IR shield, what we now observed is that we see the same effects. We see again an overly high detection threshold being derived, and also for some parts motion and the reference measurement without motion are indistinguishable. And now comes the however. The however is that there is a residual detectability when we would consider an adaptive attacker. And this is what we call the residual detectability. Because now an attacker, being aware of our countermeasure, could go on and reduce the threshold for detecting the motion, and could restore at least some of the detectability. And as we will see next, this residual detectability follows a certain spatial pattern. So our question that we asked was, where in the target area could an attacker detect the motion? And for this, we used a rotating reflector, which acts as a concentrated local motion, and we placed this reflector at 20 position throughout our test environment. And then we looked how much of the motion of the reflector were we able to detect. And here we see the spatial distribution of the detection rates. So first of all, what we see is the detection rates are for most of parts of the rooms at 100%. So this is except for the parts at the lower side, which are far from the line of sight. In this area, we can detect motion really well without IR shield. Now, when we enable IR shield, this is how it looks with IR shield, and now we are close to 0% for almost every position except very close to the transmitter. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's visible. So it's largely suspended. So now, coming to the case where we have this adaptive attacker reducing the threshold so that to restore detection performance, this is how it looks with the adaptive attacker. So it's a significant gain compared to the case without IR shield, but in fact close to the transmitter and in the line of sight, the attacker would be able to restore some detection performance. And this is also the reason why, if possible, we would recommend to place Wi-Fi routers close to maybe a publicly accessible area, because this is the area when we put the router to the side of the room towards the public area, then we will prevent motion to take place within a possible line of sight towards an adversary. Okay, so one design goal, as I mentioned, was to make IR shield not affect the wireless quality of service. And here we see the packet error rates, or short the PER, of the Wi-Fi communication with and without IR shield, and when the error rates are already low. we see that RShield does not cause a rise of the error rates. And further, also when the error rates are already high, this, by the way, on the x-axis is basically the transmission speed of the link, which is getting more susceptible to noise for higher data rates. And this is why the error rates were going up in our measurement. And also here we see that RShield does not improve the wireless communication. So to conclude, RShield does neither degrade nor improve the wireless quality of service. Can I continue? Can I continue? Just finish? Sure. Okay. Okay, so then I will skip future work because I'm already getting the stop indication, and initially I promised to be fast. So to conclude, we first introduced the preliminaries to perform wireless sensing on the physical layer using Wi-Fi. We then introduced wireless sensing and showed how a passive eavesdropper can detect human motion from radio signals. And then we introduced RShield as a novel countermeasure against such attacks. And it's independent of devices, waveforms, and standards. And it's suited, because of this, as a plug-and-play countermeasure, which can be put into operation immediately to existing wireless networks. So finally, we presented an evaluation of RShield, and we've shown that it defeats a state-of-the-art human motion detection attack from the literature. Thanks for your attention, and there you can find the paper and also the data sets that we have recorded.